Why are we still hooked on Adam Thielen and Christian Kirk having big fantasy games in week 8? It's time to break down our wide receiver and tight end rankings and matchups. Here is a beginning edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie, Iyer. And I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, we have an exciting Thursday show here. We're going to look at the rankings and break down wide receivers and tight ends for week number 8. So we'll get into that in a moment. Across the network, this is a crossover Thursday, breaking down the games of week 8. It's brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code, all lowercase LockedOnNFL, for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Michelle, let's dive into the wide receiver rankings. And interesting news we're getting in this 49ers-Bengals game that Sam Darnold looks like he will start concussion protocol for Brock Purdy. But on the other side of this, we're really kind of high on Jamar Chase this week. Coming off a bye, we both have him at wide receiver 5.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about the 49ers matchup. I am a bit worried for Joe Burrow in this matchup, but we've seen Joe Burrow not have great fantasy days while Jamar Chase has still done his thing, right? He's still going to get the yards. I don't know how many touchdowns will be available, but not worried about Jamar Chase in this matchup. I will say now, though, I am a little bit worried about Brandon Aiyuk. I don't know what this offense looks like with Sam Darnold under center. I mean, we only know Sam Darnold with the Jets and the Panthers, and that wasn't pretty, right? Is he better now with Kyle Shanahan? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, the other side, keep in mind, this 49ers pass rush, it kind of disappeared in Minnesota. I think they'll try to rev it back up. They play better at home in general, but if they're not getting to the quarterback and letting guys roam free downfield, you saw what Jordan Addison did. I think Jamar Chase is a similar type receiver. You can put him inside, outside, has a lot of speed to stretch the field. That's great news for Jamar Chase. You also might get T. Higgins back in full force. It looks that way. We'll talk about if we trust him or not a little bit later. But, yeah, I do like Jamar Chase quite a bit. It's not like this 49ers secondary shut down. Javarius Ward really struggled last week. So they have a few issues on the back end. And if there's time for Joe Burrow, I think you can pick them apart. So something to watch there. Now, we tease at the top. Adam Thielen, this guy just keeps on producing, and it's a bye week. That's the only thing that could slow him down. Now, the Texans' pass defense is not bad, but he is the go-to guy eating a major volume here from Bryce Young. I think the Panthers should be competitive in this game. It's at home. They're coming off a bye. They'll try to get things going. They have a new play caller. It is Thomas Brown. He takes over now, the former Rams assistant from Frank Reich. So that could also work in Thielen's favor to make sure that he's schemed up. And then Christian Kirk, another guy that we like because he's versatile, can play in the slot and dominate there. Pretty good matchup against the Steelers, who I think have resorted to putting Patrick Peterson inside. That's not good because Christian Kirk is pretty fast and Peterson is old.
Yeah, Adam Thielen is just an every week you plug him in and he's a top 12 guy. Every week he's just dominating. And I have him at wide receiver 9 this week. It's only behind like the top names in the league with your AJ Browns, your Diggs, your Cup, your Hill, Chase, like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Lamb and Puka Nacua are the only guys I have ranked above Adam Thielen because he's been just so dominant and pretty much like the only guy catching balls with the Panthers. It's kind of crazy, his target share over the last handful of weeks. With Christian Kirk, he is one of my favorite plays this week against the Steelers secondary that's just allowing so many points, fantasy points to wide receivers, so many yards. And I feel like Christian Kirk is more of that wide receiver that will just destroy Pittsburgh over the middle than Calvin Ridley is. So Calvin Ridley's just a high upside play. He could disappear in any given week. We know that. But Christian Kirk has been extremely consistent since like week 1. He was non-existent, but after week 1, he's been extremely consistent for fantasy. So I love him this week.
Yeah, and he's been really helped, I think, by Zay Jones being on the shelf because it really compresses their targets. They don't force Zay Jones into the action. So, and Kirk is just a guy that you can move around into the better matchup. So that's really helped. Now, one guy that we are a little bit different on this week, we still have him as a wide receiver 2, is Chris Olave. Now, I'm basing this on the matchup against the Colts. The Colts secondary is not very good. And it's on a fast track surface that he's used to playing at home, and he's in Indianapolis. So I think Chris Olave gets going this week. I think they're well aware of not giving him the ball. I know this is the front end and worried about Derek Carr and if they can get it to him, but this is as good as it gets, I think, for Olave in a secondary matchup, and I think you'll see him take advantage of that, especially after I thought he got going a little bit last game. I know it's been a while since they played on Thursday, but I think Olave can actually come through this week.
Yeah, I mean, he had 15 targets last week. You would have thought that would, return a huge game, and it didn't. He only had 57 yards, 7 receptions. I will say the Colts secondary has been better over the last couple of weeks. They held Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley to very little in week 6, held Amari Cooper to like nothing last week. But again, that was with PJ Walker. So who knows? But like Chris Olave is a guy I'll still plug in, I guess. If it's a standard league, I don't really want to play him. But if it's half PPR, I'll still plug him in. It's just, it seems Derek Carr is getting frustrated with him. And then he had the speeding ticket and got arrested. I mean, I think he'll still play in this game and be fine. It's just, I don't have super high expectations for him. So like if you're choosing between a Chris Olave or Jordan Addison, we both I have Jordan Addison actually ranked quite a bit higher than you this week. You would be going with Olave over Addison?
Yeah, I think so. And I have to just make sure Jair Alexander and what his status is for the Packers. I think Jordan Addison is clearly the number 1 receiver, right? I mean, we haven't seen too much of KJ Osborne or Brandon Powell. So I think he's going to be marked, right? When he start making big plays and dominating on the field, I think the Packers have to mark him a little bit. So, and he's a rookie, and Alexander's a pretty savvy older corner that's been around for a while. So somebody to watch there where I don't think Chris Olave has to worry about that kind of a matchup that he's had in some of the earlier games this week. So something to just keep in mind with Addison. That's why I'm lowering my expectations. I also don't see necessarily with the Vikings defense playing well, the Packers defense playing well, I don't see a lot of points where I could see Colts, Saints. You've seen the Colts, wherever they go, it seems like there's some high scoring games. And that's kind of where I'm looking at too. The opportunities to have a little bit of back and forth and passing yardage maybe there with the Saints this week versus the Vikings.
Now, a game that probably will not be high scoring, the Jets versus Giants. I mean, it's not going to be the prettiest game, right? No one's expecting that. But Garrett Wilson, is he trustworthy now? I mean, 2 of the last 3 weeks the Jets have played, he's had at least 15 PPR points. He had 14 targets and then 7 targets and then 12 targets over the last 3 games. I think he's a guy that you just keep plugging in. You know his talent. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 2. But this Giants secondary, you can throw on them. Like they're not too scary. So I think I would rather play a Garrett Wilson than Chris Olave this week. I trust him a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to call it right here, Michelle. We already made him the eBay guaranteed fit fantasy pick of the week earlier in the week. I'm going to call it. This is going to be his first 100-yard and touchdown game of the season. I think you look at Zach Wilson, they're going to have him prepped well after the bye. This Giants pass rush, I think, will be held at bay. That's a big break for the Jets. So they can push the ball downfield to Garrett Wilson. And look, these corners are not playing all that well for the Giants. So something to look at. And so I think he gets 100 and touchdown. It's been something that we thought was going to be a regular occurrence at Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback. But I think coming off a bye, you're going to see some improved things from this Jets offense. And this matchup is just too good. So I'm feeling it here with Garrett Wilson, and I'm also maybe willing it to happen because I really need him on one of my teams to come through this week. So, and it's been tough to watch it. I had Garrett Wilson on bye last week, same team as Bijan Robinson. I just can't get out of my own way with some of these things. So we're calling it for Garrett Wilson. Hopefully, he'll come through for you. Now, we will get into more wide receiver decisions and things we're looking at the position, their wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 in our next couple segments. But before that, we do have to look at a word from one of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by DoorDash. And look, I'm sitting at home working all day long there on Sundays, and I'm tuned to all the games. And they're prepping at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and waiting for the 1 p.m. kickoff. So I can't get away. And sometimes I need one of my local favorite restaurants to deliver for me. And I just have to pick what I want that particular week. Is it tacos? Is it pizza? Is it Asian food? It's just a hard decision, but it's not a hard decision that DoorDash is going to be there for me to take care of that and really help me sit there and watch all the games without having to break free. So I like that here. So you can order any of these things right to your door and you're set up. I can be ready right there at 12:50, right before kickoff, with great deals on things that I'm looking for. All your favorite restaurants and stores are available. You can get retail, grocery, whatever you need to get game day ready and get you through the entire game day. So get prepared before game day. Stock up on your favorite appetizers. You can do that on DoorDash as well. But if you need stuff delivered to you during the game, that's helpful for you as well. So it's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter the code LOCK23. Again, don't forget, it's a LOCK23 for 50% off up to $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 more. Subject to change, terms do apply. All right, Michelle, let us continue looking at some wide receivers. And look, Terry McLaurin, we know his history against the Eagles, and really any NFC East team is pretty good here. So I have him down at 23. I have a little bit higher at 17. And the guy that's always causing some issues here that we're looking at is Calvin Ridley. I'm at 24. That's kind of where he is in terms of the scoring based on some big games. And you're kind of right there with me. So, look, I actually think there's some hope for Calvin Ridley, the way the Steelers play defense. And I think that could create some opportunities. But what I'd like to see, Calvin Ridley is not getting open to the outside. Keep in mind, he can run to the slot. I like to see them switch their roles a little bit with him and Christian Kirk. That would get him open in this game. I think they have to do something, right? They've had a mini bye. They have to look at this guy and say there's a talent being wasted on the field. So I do have concerns again with Ridley going forward. It's not going to just be magically fixed, but I think I'm going for upside. I'm going for Ridley. If I'm going for floor, I think I'm going for McLaurin.
And I think McLaurin has a lot of upside, though, in this matchup. I mean, you can't run against the Eagles, so I don't think the Commanders are even going to have. They're not going to be able to do it. Brian Robinson running against this Eagles defensive line, like no one can. So I think they're going to have to throw a lot. I don't think it's going to be pretty necessarily, but he has at least 9 targets in 3 of the last 4 games, 80 plus receiving yards in 3 of the last 4 games, and the Eagles are allowing even more fantasy points per game than the Steelers, who are just hemorrhaging fantasy points to the wide receiver position this season. So both the Eagles and Steelers stink at stopping wide receivers. I do think Calvin Ridley, if you roster him, then you have to play him in this matchup, right? Because if you're not going to play him against the Steelers, when are you going to play him? It's just he's very hit or miss. And I think Terry McLaurin is much safer. So if I was deciding between the two, it'd be McLaurin. But if you also roster Ridley, you should probably try to fit him into your lineup this week in that matchup. Another guy that's been, pretty much useless besides one game, T. Higgins, right? For the Bengals. Now he has to face the 49ers. They're coming off a bye. He is now nearly 4 weeks away from suffering the rib injury. I have him at wide receiver 22. So I am a bit higher than you. You have him at wide receiver 37. Probably ends somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
In that scenario.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect from him. I mean, he didn't look all that great before he was healthy. I don't know if he's checked out a little bit from this offense. And we know as soon as he was out, Joe Burrow just went nuts with Jamar Chase. And keep in mind, there's more mouths to feed that are starting to emerge here with not Tyler Boyd necessarily, but Trenton Irwin, Andre Ayusvas, the speedster from Princeton is there. They also have potentially a healthier Irv Smith Jr. at tight end. Keep in mind, Joe Burrow likes to throw to the tight end. It is a tough matchup with Fred Warner and the 49ers, but it can diversify the passing game a little bit, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean Higgins is going to be locked in as the number 2 target guy behind Jamar Chase. And that's my point here. Look, I think he's been a little bit off. He's had a lot of drops. It really comes back to, does Joe Burrow trust him as much right now to go in that direction? They need a win badly. Does he want to go in this direction force? And I don't think he's as versatile to get away from that Javarius Ward size matchup this week. So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I think he's going to end up probably retaining some baseline wide receiver 3 numbers, but nothing too exciting. I don't think he can have a big game this week.
Yeah, he did have 8 targets in each game prior to the injury. So if he gets 8 targets in this game, I do think he ends up somewhere in the low, somewhere in the 20s, maybe 30s. I might end up moving him down a little bit. I'm not confident in playing T. Higgins, but I do think he's startable. Moving on to the Texans wide receivers, Nico Collins. So we both have Nico Collins as our wide receiver 21 this week. I also really like Tank Dell as well. Well, when I say really like, I have him at wide receiver 39. You have him at 40, but I really like him as a flex play.
Yeah.
Wide receivers are super deep this week. I mean, no one's on bye. There's a lot of wide receivers I like, but if I rostered Tank Dell and I wanted a high upside flex play, I think he's a good option. And Nico Collins, you just keep plugging in week to week. He has a super high ceiling. We've seen that. And he seems to be the go-to guy for CJ Stroud. I love the matchup against the Panthers this week. So I think you can play both of them.
Yeah. I mean, my only concern here is that maybe there's not a high volume from CJ Stroud. I mean, you can run. I know the Texans have been great running. We'll see what you get from Damian Pierce and Devin Singletary that way. So there's that. But also looking at this matchup, now the Panthers are really hurting at safety, so that could open things up as well. And Dalton Schultz could be a good matchup here. So really comes down to also Robert Woods playing Dalton Schultz, how much they cut into Tank Dell's workload now that he's coming back in terms of targets. That's why I think Collins is pretty safe there as a solid wide receiver too. But yeah, will they just kind of rev up Tank Dell again? Or they say, look, we got more guys involved, and necessarily we're not going to force it to him unless that big play is there. So the question is he the Tutu Atwell type in this offense for the first 3 weeks, or is he the Tutu Atwell type in this offense from the last few weeks where he's just getting a few looks in key situations with other people there? So something to keep in mind. I think Dell is very talented, but I want to see him come back and produce a little bit before I'm going to trust him totally as wide receiver 3 this week.
I think that's fair. Definitely, it's a risky play. I just think it's a high upside play as well. Another risky play, because he always is, Gabe Davis, and he plays on Thursday Night Football. So you have to decide today if you're starting Gabe Davis or not. I mean, it was a beautiful stretch of games there where he was very good for fantasy. And then the last 2 weeks, it's not even that they've been disappointing. He's been non-existent. I mean, 3 fantasy points and 1.6 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. Now he gets the Buccaneers. The great wide receivers are getting it done against the Buccaneers. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore all had really good games against the Buccaneers. I don't know what to do with Gabe Davis. I have to decide between Gabe Davis or Chris Olave tonight, and I'm struggling. Which way would you go?
Oh, I think I would play Chris Olave a little bit safer, but I think Gabe Davis actually has a good matchup.
It's a standard league.
Oh, yeah. So you got to hope for
a touchdown.
That's tough. Yeah, you have to hope for a touchdown, and I can't help you exactly there. But I think if someone's going to score a long touchdown, you look at – I'll say there's one thing you can circle. I mean, the Lions did get a big play from Jameson Williams, right? So that's one thing you can look at. Gabe Davis is a big play receiver. You look at the way they operate. It's a zone coverage. I mean, they really messed with Gabe Davis in the last 2 matchups, right? People got physical with him. I don't think – even though he's like a big dude, like I don't think he likes that. He's not the greatest separator. So I think he needs some space to operate. And look, Stephon Diggs can get open against anybody, and then Josh Allen can be overthrown into him. But I think, look, their offense is under a lot of pressure and heat right now with their play calling. They got to diversify. There's not a lot here, right? There's just Dalton Kincaid. There's no Dawson Knox playing. So look, the matchup says you can go there. So Gabe Davis, they've given up some home run plays. I think it's going to come down to that from one of these guys for you, Michelle. And I don't know if It's very close for me if you're going to go standard here, but I'm going to say Olave is a little bit safer, but Davis, I could definitely see having a rebound game here, but he's got to get that big play touchdown. I don't know if there's going to be much more on the table here. So I'm banking on that. I'm going to have to play him in a 14-team league. I think that's how you kind of look at it is 14-team leagues. Yeah, for sure. Gabe Davis guy put in, but 12, maybe you're not, and pivot from that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it definitely just comes down to that big touchdown. Another guy that's a big play machine last week, anyways, but has been pretty solid for fantasy over the last few weeks is rookie Colts wide receiver Josh Downs. We're both confident in him this week. You have him at wide receiver 27. I have him at wide receiver 26. Now, you might look at the Saints matchup and say, ooh, this is a bad matchup. I think it's bad for Michael Pittman, not for
Yeah,
Josh
definitely.
Downs. The Saints have allowed the most receiving yards to wide receivers out of the slot in the NFL this year, but the fewest yards to wide receivers out wide. And Josh Downs has the fourth most receiving yards among all wide receivers out of the slot this season, behind only Thielen, Christian Kirk, and Keenan Allen. And like he's doing this as a rookie. That's really impressive. But I like this matchup a lot for him because if Michael Pittman is covered up by Lattimore, then Gardner Minshew's just gonna be throwing it up to Josh Downs. You know he's not scared to make mistakes whatsoever. So I really like this matchup for Downs this week.
Yeah, he'll come through for you for sure. I mean, again, Colts and teams just seem to score a lot of points when they get together on the turf in Indianapolis. So something to watch out there. But yeah, the matchup is fantastic. Alante Taylor is their weak link here in coverage versus Paulson Adebo is kind of arisen with Marshawn Lattimore there in coverage. That's kind of the personnel situation that's created that opportunity for slot receivers against the Saints. Now, this is an interesting question, and we'll see. This could be Marquise Brown's last game as a Cardinal. He's on the trade block once again. He's playing his old team, revenge game against the Ravens. Deontay Johnson gets the Jaguars. Now, this one is tough for me. I'm not sure where I'm going. I think I like Marquise Brown a little bit better. I have him at 31 versus 36 for Deontay Johnson here. So that's where I'm going. And part of it is the Jaguars have a pretty good secondary. And that's kind of where I've gone with this matchup, Michelle.
Yeah, I guess it really just depends if Tyson Campbell is back for the Jaguars and Andre Cisco. They could be without a starting safety, their best corner, both dealing with hamstring injuries. They did get in a limited practice on Wednesday, so just keep an eye on that. But Deontay Johnson, I mean, we saw him come back, play limited snaps, and right away produce. So you know he's going to get targets. You know he's going to get yards, even against this tougher Jaguars defense. And I don't think Najee's not going to be able to run against the Jaguars whatsoever. So I'm fine with Deontay Johnson, especially in PPR leagues. Now with Marquise Brown, he's getting a ton of targets. He's just not doing anything with them. I mean, 34 yards, 49 yards over the last 2 weeks, and he had 18 targets over that time. He's just not really doing much of anything. I don't love it against this Ravens matchup either that they've really picked up on defense. So I'd rather go with Deontay than Marquise Brown this week. And that wraps up our wide receiver section. We have to talk about the so fun tight ends that went off last week on National Tight End Day, but we'll see if they will continue that greatness this week. But before we get into the tight ends, let's talk about a couple more of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is very easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. My favorite player prop for the Thursday night football game, that's tonight, is Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid. It's over 40.5 receiving yards against the Buccaneers. Their starting tight end Dawson Knox will miss the game with a wrist injury, and I think Kincaid had a breakout week last week, and I think he just continues to break out and build on that performance. So again, that's Dalton Kincaid over 40.5 receiving yards on Thursday Night Football. You can sign up and place a bet for tonight's game or place a bet for games this weekend by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon and enjoy the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. This episode is also brought to you from Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you're not just hoping to have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com and use promo code LOCKEDON. All right, let's hop into these tight ends, Vinny. Everyone was going off last week. George Kittle had a huge game. Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, like Darren Waller. So obviously Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Hawkinson, even Sam Laporta, they're in your lineups. But do you believe that George Kittle and Darren Waller this week will continue to put up big performances?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the target pecking order goes for Sam Darnold in there. But you also look at the Bengals. They've given up some production to the tight end all season long, and we'll see if Deebo Samuel missed a game. Who was the leading receiver last week? It wasn't Brandon Ayuk. It was George Kittle there on Monday night against the Vikings. So he's coming off a nice game. And again, we've talked about this. If one of these guys is out, it's going to help the other two produce. It didn't help Ayuk all that much other than the first half against the Vikings. But yeah, the Bengals can't give it up to the tight end. They really need to make a trade. They really miss their safeties there. So we'll see if they can pick up someone here. Probably not before this game. So, but yeah, they're pretty weak at the safety, and that's where you can attack them. So I think Kittle can have a nice game again this week. I think they're going to need to, and Darnold might be more relying on him this week versus what Brock Purdy did. So something to watch there. And Darren Waller, look, the Jets matchup isn't too bad. I think I just want to fade a lot of the Giants this week. I think the Giants are going to be really hard pressed to move the ball well, but he's Darren Waller. I think you still have to play him. I just don't think you could expect a big game. I'm at number 6 this weekend. I'm at 5, so not really a big deviation. And look, you're still playing him. I just don't have high expectations for him.
I actually do have pretty high expectations for Waller this week. The Jets are allowing the most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season. So a really nice matchup for him. And it's as long as Tyrod Taylor is under center, right? If Daniel Jones comes back, maybe I'll lower expectations a little bit. But with Tyrod Taylor, he's done very well. He's getting the targets. They seem to have a way better connection than Jones does with anybody, really. Like Tyrod Taylor seems better for this Giants offense just overall. So I love Darren Waller in this matchup as long as Tyrod Taylor is playing. George Kittle, here's the thing with him, right? 2 good weeks out of the last 4, but then also 2 weeks with 1.9 points and 1.1 points. That is killer. It's not like that is beyond killer for a guy that you drafted so early. If you can trade George Kittle before this weekend, I would do it. Like 100%. Like he will have his big games, no doubt. But when Deebo comes back, maybe it's this week, it's going to be even more inconsistent. You just can't take those 1-point games because of the inconsistency that Kyle Shanahan wants to use him. So I'm never happy playing George Kittle because you never know what you're going to get there. And it's the same thing with Kyle Pitts, except he never blows up like George Kittle does. So it's a little different. You have him as a top 8 play. Again, I am at tight end 13. So just out of the range where I would want to play him. He has 1 touchdown this season, 1 game with 50-plus yards. Titans are pretty tough against tight ends this season. Only allowed 1 tight end to have over 7 fantasy points. Haven't allowed a tight end to score a touchdown this year. I don't want to play Kyle Pitts, but you always do.
Yeah, I think the thing that's going to help Kyle Pitts, okay, a couple things that happened here is Kevin Byard is gone, and he is a key cover safety. I mean, he's one of the better safeties in the league. He's now with the Eagles. They traded him away. So that's going to change our tight end coverage. The other thing is the Falcons use Kyle Pitts a lot like a wide receiver. So I think that's going to also help him and Drake London. I also like Drake London a lot in this game to be the guys. And I think this is sneaky. I think people think, okay, the Falcons are going to go in there, bowl over Tennessee, and that's it. And they're not going to throw all that much. But the Titans are sneaky. They're coming off a bye. Mike Vrabel's typically successful here when I think it's going to be hard. Falcons defense is going to have to adjust to Will Levis right away. It's not like a shutdown defense. So you're going to look at some things that are going to open up. And I think the Falcons are going to have to throw a little bit more than we expect. But when they do, it's got to be Pitts and London here. And really the traditional tight end, Johnny Smith, he's in the revenge game. I don't like him quite as much this week. So that's how I look at it, Michelle. And I think Byard not being there is going to help, but I think it helps Pitts more than Smith in this game on top of facing that weak Titans cornerback group.
Yeah, if I had to play one of these Falcons tight ends, I'd rather just go with the tight end that's actually being used, Jonnu Smith, and actually scoring more fantasy points. So I'd go with Jonnu Smith. But the real question is here is, do you go with Kyle Pitts or Jonnu Smith or a guy like Logan Thomas, who has had an up and down fantasy year? It's really just in PPR, this would be a question, right? Because it's not like, I mean, none of these guys are really doing a ton in the end zone, but he gets the Eagles. We already talked about how you can't run against the Eagles. So you expect Sam Howell to be passing a lot. You expect that pass rush to be able to get to Howell a lot. Will he be just checking down the Logan Thomas a ton?
Yeah, I mean, I did mention where Kevin Byard went. I was going to say Keith Byars. He's a former Eagles fullback, so I'm getting there confused. Byard and Byars both playing for the Eagles. But when you look at it, Byard again, this is why they got him, right? They looked at the Reed Blankenship, by the way, and he was a former Titan that they were looking at that he was hurt, so they needed to get some help at safety. I'm not saying that suddenly shores up everything for the Eagles in the middle of the field, but I think Logan Thomas is an okay play. I wouldn't play him over Pitts, but I would definitely play him over Jonas Smith this week. Again, Jonas Smith to me, like I just still can't totally believe that he's still a thing here, where Logan Thomas has got to be involved. And look, they got to get the ball out of Sam Howell's hands because he's just going to get destroyed. If this sack rate continues, it's going to be bad for him. And that's why you've seen a lot of Logan Thomas and a lot of Curtis Samuel in short areas. So I'd go Pitts, Thomas Smith. Am I confident about any one of these guys? Not too confident, but again, I would say Pitts still with the upside here with the athleticism. I think has the better matchup than these two guys.
And now there's a group of guys here to end with that may have been on your waivers this week, at least one or two of them, but it's Taysom Hill against the Colts, Dalton Kincaid on Thursday Night Football. I just brought him up in my FanDuel. He's my favorite bet of the night at 42.5 receiving yards, I believe it was, against the Buccaneers, or Dalton Schultz against the Panthers. Which one is your favorite to play this week?
Yeah, I think it's definitely Dalton Kincaid just because of where he's at. I mean, it's close between him and Taysom Hill, but Taysom Hill, I'm looking at, is he going to get some scoring that way? But I think Dalton Kincaid is a favorite one I want to play because I want to see him unlocked a little bit. I think we both, interestingly enough, have Taysom Hill ranked ahead of Dalton Kincaid, but in terms of wanting to see somebody and excited to see what he can do in a bigger role, I think it's Dalton Kincaid. I mean, Taysom Hill is more like, okay, you're going to play him, hope he gets the rushing yards and a touchdown and do what he does, right? But Dalton Kincaid, I'm actually like, I want to see this rookie deliver and maybe be a league winner going forward with his usage, finally without Dawson Knox in the mix. Like, I never understood the draft pick, and it didn't make sense even during the season when Dawson Knox was healthy. But now that he's out of the mix, this is the clear spot. And don't forget their other tight end is also hurt. He's the guy who scored against the Giants a couple weeks ago, Quentin Morris. So this is the guy at tight end. Everything's kind of lined up very quickly on top of the receiver sucking. So I like that. And interesting with Taysom Hill, this is a weird stack that you can make this week in DFS. It is almost like a 2 QB stack. And it's weird, but Derek Carr and Taysom Hill is a pretty good one. Then you'll cover pretty much all the scoring for the Saints in that game. So something to look at there. That's the way I would play Hill mostly this week if I want some exposure to him. But yeah, Kincaid, let him loose. Let's see what he can do.
Yeah, Kincaid's definitely the most exciting option, right, out of this group. And I do think he has the most upside. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year, but Josh Allen, like he's going to be looking for Kincaid in the end zone. So hopefully he can score his first one tonight. With Taysom Hill, the thing why I am interested in possibly playing him is because he's getting targets all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
He never got targets. He was always like a tight end. I put in like quotes because he was more of a running back than a tight end, but they are actually using him as a real tight end and a rusher and sometimes a quarterback. So I do, and I like his matchup against the Colts. So I definitely think he's a good option this week. with Dalton Schultz, he's been fantastic the last 3 games, but all of the targets came as soon as Tank Dell went out with the concussion. I'm just would love to see, are those targets still there? I mean, the Texans offense instantly got way worse and weren't scoring points as soon as they had to utilize Dalton Schultz. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's your best go-to guy in this offense to actually do well for you and put up points. So I'm interested to see if the targets still stay there for him.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is how do the Texans want to approach this? They want to spread the field on the Panthers, or do they say, look, this team is weak at safety, this team is weak against the run? Do we want to just put in our other tight end and do 12 personnel, kind of run down, knowing Dalton Schultz is pretty good in that aspect as well? So we'll see how it works out. And again, if they play from ahead, I think that's not as great for Tank Dell. So you kind of want the Panthers to be somewhat competitive in this game. So the Texans have to not only have CJ Stroud drop back enough, but also to spread it around. So I think that's what comes. I think Dalton Schultz is less game script dependent, maybe in this one. And look, he's just produced, and I think he's developing that chemistry that we thought that could be there with CJ Stroud. Just took a few weeks, and Schultz had to be fully healthy himself. So something to look at. So I think Schultz is definitely playable this week. I have him at a borderline 13 there, and you have him at 11. So right there would say split the difference, and he is a back end starter there in 12-team leagues.
Yeah, I'd still rather play Schultz than Pitts. So there's that.
We'll see how it plays out. Yeah, we'll keep track of that one. I think Kyle Pitts and Trevor Lawrence are going to be fun, like the rest of the season. So we'll see where they end up. And it'll be a fun game to play here. But yeah, those are definitely our biggest polarizing players this season. And again, I'll have to keep standing up for them, and maybe we'll split the difference and get what we want out of them going forward this season. So we'll see how it plays out this week with Lawrence, Pitts, and all these other guys at running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, anyone you're playing this week. Now, we're going to do Friday a little bit different here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We're going to look at some flex plays, some sleepers that you can look at across the board, some little lesser known names that might be out there in your leagues if you're really hurting at a position or some injury news throws you off. And then we'll also, of course, look at our prize picks of the week. We did pretty well last week, so looking forward to diving into those and giving you our best props there. So a lot of good things that you can look at as a good recap and review of the week as well. So we'll do a little bit of that, and then we'll have a little bit of DFS sprinkled in to see if these guys are good values to target there based on their prices as well. So a lot of good stuff there, a little bit of smorgasbord for you to end the week on Locked On Fantasy Football. For the show, looking at our wide receiver and tight end rankings, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.